Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a really personal question for so many people living with multiple sclerosis. And we're going to do it using some fantastic insights from a recent lecture by neurologist Dr. Emily Reiser. This is the one question Dr. Reiser hears almost every single day in her clinic. For decades, the answer was, well, kind of just a frustrating shrug. But now cutting-edge science is finally beginning to untangle the two, and the answers are changing absolutely everything. So first things first, let's get a really clear picture of the battlefield. We tend to think of MS as just a brain disease, but it's much more of an outside-in attack, one that actually starts with your own immune system. The main target for the immune system is a substance called myelin. The analogy of an electrical wire is just perfect here. Myelin is the insulation wrapped around all the nerve fibers in your brain and spinal cord. Without it, those critical electrical signals that control everything you do would just short circuit. So with MS, the immune system makes a mistake. It attacks and strips away that myelin insulation. And this damage leaves behind hard scar tissue, or sclerosis. See? Multiple scars, multiple sclerosis. That's literally where the name comes from. And the result is basically a biological traffic jam, where messages from the brain to the body get slowed down, distorted, or maybe even lost completely. So who are the main culprits in this attack? Well, for a long time, the focus was all on T cells. But we know now the story is so much more complex. The real ringleaders include B cells, which are like these little antibody factories that can actually set up shop inside your central nervous system, and microglial cells, the brain's own scavenger cells, which it turns out contribute to that chronic smoldering damage we're going to talk more about in a bit. Okay, so if we have a better idea of who the bad actors are, the next logical question is, how do we catch them in the act? And this is where the science has made some incredible leaps, kicking off a whole new era of diagnosis that gives us answers with more speed and certainty than ever before. The modern gold standard is something called the McDonald's criteria. It gives doctors this really rigorous framework. To get a diagnosis, they need to prove that damage has happened in different places. That's dissemination in space and at different times. Now, the real breakthrough here is that with MRIs and spinal fluid analysis, they can prove this dissemination in time without having to wait around for a second attack. That means a definitive diagnosis and the start of treatment can happen years earlier than it used to. And this is where the detective work gets really cool. Doctors can now look for something called the central vein sign. It turns out MS inflammation has a unique signature. It loves to cluster around tiny little veins in the brain. Finding this on an MRI is like finding a fingerprint at a crime scene. It gives doctors incredible confidence that MS is the true culprit, and not some other look-alike condition. All right, so if we can diagnose MS earlier and with more certainty, how do we fight it? Well, the treatment strategy has evolved dramatically. We've gone from just blaming T cells to launching a much more sophisticated, multi-pronged attack. And this just brilliantly illustrates the new playbook. Instead of one single approach, we now have multiple strategies. We can sequester immune cells, basically trap them in a lymph node so they can't get to the brain. We can deplete the problematic B cells, taking out those antibody factories. Or we can use new oral medications to actually modulate how B cells and even those microglial cells behave, delivering an outside-in punch. A huge part of this modern arsenal is a class of drugs called monoclonal antibodies. You can think of these as biological smart bombs. They are engineered in a lab to hunt for one specific target, like those problem B cells, and take them out without causing a ton of collateral damage. And here's a little pro tip for you. If you ever see a drug name that ends in mAb, you know it's one of these targeted therapies. And now we're seeing the next evolution, BTK inhibitors. What makes these so exciting is that they are small enough to do something most drugs can't. They can cross the blood-brain barrier. This lets them get inside the central nervous system and calm down not just the B cells, but also those smoldering microglial cells we mentioned earlier. So they're fighting the battle from inside the fortress. And just like with amibabs, you can often spot these by their name, which typically ends in nib. So why is this such a big deal? As Dr. Reiser put it herself, this is huge. For the first time, these new BTK inhibitors are showing real promise for treating the progressive forms of MS, the ones that previously had no effective options. This is a potential game changer for people with what's called non-relapsing secondary progressive MS. So let's move into our final section and see how all this incredible new science helps us finally get back to that original, deeply personal question. To really get to the heart of the matter, we need to understand a concept called PIR. This is the official term for that chronic smoldering we've mentioned. It's the silent progression that happens in the background, that feeling that things are slowly getting worse, even when you aren't having a major relapse or attack. And for so many, this is the most frightening part of MS. But here is the absolute game changer. For the very first time, we can actually see this smoldering on an MRI. Neurologists can now spot things like cells, which are just old lesions that are slowly getting bigger, or pearls, which are lesions with a glowing iron rim that acts like a bright red flag for chronic inflammation. What was once an invisible fear can now be tracked on a screen. And the tracking tools go way beyond imaging. There are now these sophisticated blood tests, like the Octave score. I mean, think about this. It analyzes 18 different proteins related to MS activity in your blood, and then boils all that complexity down to a single number, from 0 to 10. It's like having a biological speedometer for the disease itself. So here's the final crucial layer. All this MS-specific data has to be viewed through the lens of just normal aging. Because as we all get older, two big things happen to our immune systems. It gets weaker, a process called immunosenescence, and it also gets noisier, creating this low-grade hum of inflammation called inflammaging, which brings us right back to where we started. With MRIs that can see smoldering lesions, blood tests that can literally score disease activity, and a clear understanding of what normal inflammaging looks like, well, that line is getting sharper and sharper. The era of just shrugging is ending. And for the first time, when a patient asks, is it my MS or am I just getting old? Doctors are on the verge of finally being able to answer with data, not just debate.